The Meridian Club occupied the top 3 floors of a glass tower in Manhattan's financial district, a place where membership required both an 8-figure net worth and the endorsement of 3 existing members. Its private dining rooms had witnessed mergers that reshaped industries, deals that toppled governments, and conversations that moved markets. The walls were lined with rare first-edition books that no one read, and the art collection rivaled small museums. A Rothko in the lobby, a Basquiat in the bar, a Monet in the main dining hall that members glanced at the way ordinary people glanced at wallpaper. Tonight, Room 17 hosted 12 executives from Hartwell Chen Industries and their potential acquisition target, a renewable energy startup called Solaris Dynamics. The room smelled of aged leather and money, of rare wines and expensive cologne, of power so concentrated it had its own atmospheric pressure. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over a mahogany table that had witnessed the birth and death of empires. Waiters in black uniforms moved silently in the periphery, visible only when needed, invisible the rest of the time. Elena Vasquez moved through this world like a ghost, refilling water glasses with practiced invisibility. 26 years old, dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, wearing the standard black uniform that marked her as staff, as furniture, really. The men in their custom Brioni suits didn't see her. The women in their Chanel and Hermes looked through her. She was a function, not a person. A pair of hands that kept glasses full and plates cleared and silence maintained. She had been invisible for 3 years now. 3 years of, "Can you refill this?" without eye contact. 3 years of hands reaching past her for menus as if she were part of the furniture. 3 years of learning that in rooms like this, people like her existed only as instruments of service, never as individuals with names or stories or minds that could parse differential equations. Before the invisibility came, the visibility. Too much of it. Columbia University, summa cum laude, double major in applied mathematics and financial engineering, a thesis on stochastic modeling that had been published in 3 academic journals before she'd even graduated. Professors who called her the most gifted quantitative mind they'd seen in a decade. Job offers from Goldman Sachs, McKinsey, Bridgewater Associates, a signing bonus from Jane Street Capital that would have paid off her student loans twice over, a future so bright it had seemed almost inevitable. Then her mother's diagnosis. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, metastasized to the liver before anyone knew to look. Insurance that covered 80%, which meant nothing when treatments cost $100,000 a month. Clinical trials in Houston, experimental therapies in Boston, a specialist in Switzerland who offered hope at $5,000 per consultation. Elena had watched her savings evaporate in 6 months, then her retirement fund, then the money from selling her studio apartment in Brooklyn. The signing bonuses became memories. The job offers expired while she sat in hospital waiting rooms, learning the rhythms of chemotherapy and the false kindness of oncologists who knew their patient was dying but couldn't say so directly. By the time Maria Vasquez died, holding her daughter's hand in a hospice room that smelled of antiseptic and grief, Elena owed $417,000 in medical debt. The jobs had moved on. The references had grown cold. Her brilliant thesis on fraud detection in financial systems gathered digital dust while collection agencies called her burner phones. So Elena had become invisible, taking whatever work would have her, serving drinks to the very people she'd once expected to become. Some nights, she recognized faces from Forbes profiles she'd studied in business school. Some nights, she poured wine for hedge fund managers, whose trading strategies she could have improved. She kept her mouth shut and her head down, and her mind occupied with calculations no one asked her to make. Tonight, she moved between conversations, catching fragments of corporate warfare. Hartwell, VO. The projections are aggressive, but that's Silicon Valley for you. They always think they're changing the world. Elena's hand trembled slightly as she poured Chateau Margaux into a glass worth more than her weekly paycheck. Not from nerves, from recognition. She had seen those projections before. Or rather, she had seen projections exactly like them 3 years ago in a case study that had earned her an A.P.U.A. in Professor Morrison's financial fraud detection seminar. The numbers on the screen at the front of the room weren't just optimistic. They weren't just aggressive. They were mathematically impossible. And she was the only person in the room who could see it. Part 2. The Arrival of Power. Richard Hartwell sat at the head of the table, like a king surveying his court. 63 years old, silver hair swept back from a face that appeared on Forbes covers and CNBC segments with mechanical regularity. His net worth fluctuated somewhere around $12 billion, depending on market conditions and the performance of his portfolio companies. He had built Hartwell Chen Industries from a small import business in Newark into a multinational conglomerate through a combination of ruthless efficiency and strategic acquisitions. He was famous for two things: never losing a negotiation and never tipping service staff. The first made him respected. The second made him a legend among the waiters, bartenders, and servers of Manhattan's elite establishments, a legend told in back kitchens and staff break rooms, a name synonymous with the casual cruelty of the very rich. Elena knew his reputation. Everyone who worked in these rooms knew it. She had served him 7 times in the past 18 months, and he had never once acknowledged her existence beyond a slight lift of his empty glass. Beside him sat David Chen, his co-founder and CFO, quieter, more analytical, the numbers man to Hartwell's dealmaker. Chen was 61, still fit from his morning Tai Chi practice, his eyes the color of obsidian and twice as hard. He had emigrated from Taiwan at 17 with $40 and a determination that had never wavered. Behind them both, a wall of lawyers and analysts in matching blue suits, tablets glowing with due diligence reports that had cost $300,000 to compile. At the other end of the table, the Solaris team radiated Silicon Valley confidence. Their CEO, Marcus Webb, was 34 and already gracing the covers of Wired and Fast Company. He wore a black turtleneck in conscious imitation of Steve Jobs, spoke in the cadence of TED Talks, and had somehow convinced the world that his solar panel technology would revolutionize the energy sector. The acquisition price under discussion, $700 million. Our conversion efficiency rates are unprecedented. The data speaks for itself. Within 18 months, we'll be the dominant player in residential solar. Within 5 years, we'll have reshaped the entire energy grid of the Western Hemisphere. He clicked to the next slide with the practiced flourish of a man who had given this presentation 100 times. Charts soared upward in hockey stick curves. Revenue projections climbed exponentially. Cost curves plummeted toward zero with the inevitability of gravity. Elena, refilling water glasses at the sideboard, felt her stomach tighten. She had seen these exact patterns before, not in successful companies, but in case studies of spectacular failures. Enron's energy projections, Theranos' blood testing claims. The numbers didn't just seem too good to be true. They violated fundamental principles of statistical probability in ways that only someone trained to see such things would notice. Hartwell impressive projections. Dr. Reeves, you've verified the underlying data? A man at Webb's side nodded with scholarly gravity. Jonathan Reeves, Ph.D., MIT, former NASA engineer, Solaris' chief technology officer. His credentials were impeccable. 15 years at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, 3 patents on photovoltaic cell design, a reputation for scientific rigor that had survived decades of peer review. His presence was meant to validate everything Webb claimed, to transform startup promises into scientific certainty. Reeves: absolutely. I've personally overseen every test. The efficiency rates are reproducible under controlled laboratory conditions. We've documented everything according to IEEE standards. We're ready to scale. Elena's hands moved automatically. Pour, step back, become invisible again, while her mind raced through statistical models she hadn't thought about in years. Eigenvalue decomposition for variance analysis, Monte Carlo, simulations for probability assessment, Benford's law distribution patterns for detecting manufactured data. The numbers on those slides didn't just fail one test, they failed all of them. Chien: the preliminary due diligence looks solid. Our team found no significant red flags in the technical documentation. Hartwell: then I think we're ready to discuss final terms. $700 million is substantial, but if your technology delivers even half of what you're projecting, we'll have the most valuable energy company in America within a decade. He reached for his wine glass. Elena was there instantly, bottle poised to pour. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. His dismissive, automatic, already looking past her to the deal waiting to be closed, before she became invisible again. No one thanked her, no one ever did. Especially not Richard Hartwell, who considered gratitude to service staff a form of weakness. Elena retreated to the service corridor, her heart pounding against her ribs like something trying to escape. Through the partially open door, she could still hear the negotiations, still see the slides cycling on the screen. Her trained eye caught details that the Hartwell Chen analysts had apparently missed, or perhaps hadn't been trained to look for. The revenue projections, She ran the numbers in her head, a habit she'd never been able to break. Year-over-year growth of 340%, then 280%, then 420%, then 315%, then 390%. The variance was wrong. Real companies didn't grow in those patterns. They followed predictable curves, regression to the mean, the natural constraints of markets and supply chains and human behavior. These numbers had been manufactured to look impressive rather than to reflect reality. The first digit distribution. Elena had written a 20-page paper on Benford's law, the mathematical principle that the leading digits in naturally occurring datasets follow a predictable logarithmic pattern. The digit 1 should appear as a leading digit about 30.1% of the time. The digit 2 should appear about 17.6% of the time. The pattern continued down to 9, which should appear only about 4.6% of the time. The numbers on Solaris's slides didn't follow that pattern. They clustered around 5s and 7s in ways that screamed manipulation. The unconscious tendency of humans to choose random numbers that were actually neither too small nor too large. The fingerprint of fabrication that only statistical analysis could reveal. The efficiency claims. Reeves had cited a 47.3% conversion rate for their solar cells. Elena remembered reading about the Shockley-Queisser limit, the theoretical maximum efficiency for single-junction solar cells, calculated by William Shockley and Hans Joachim Queisser in 1961. For a single-junction cell under standard conditions, that limit was approximately 33.7%. Even the most advanced multi-junction cells, using exotic semiconductor stacks that cost thousands of dollars per square meter, barely reached 47%, under concentrated sunlight. Solaris was claiming to have achieved near theoretical maximum efficiency in commercial production, using standard silicon. They weren't claiming breakthrough technology. They were claiming to have broken the laws of physics. That wasn't optimistic. That was impossible. She should walk away. She should finish her shift, collect her tips, if there were any from this crowd, and go home to her studio apartment in Queens with the leaking faucet and the view of a brick wall. This wasn't her problem. These weren't her people. $700 million meant nothing to men like Richard Hartwell, but it meant something to the pension funds that would buy Hartwell Chen stock after the acquisition was announced. To the retail investors who would follow the headlines about revolutionary solar technology. To all the invisible people, teachers, nurses, firefighters, factory workers, who would lose their retirement savings when the fraud inevitably collapsed. Elena's mother had lost her pension in the 2008 crash. Bad investments, the financial advisor had said. Hidden risks, complex instruments. Maria Vasquez, who had taught third grade for 40 years, who had believed in the system and done everything right, had seen her retirement evaporate because someone, somewhere, had decided that fraud was easier than honesty. She had spent her final years worrying about money instead of enjoying her grandchildren. Grandchildren she would never have because Elena had been too busy working 3 jobs to think about anything as luxurious as a personal life. Elena straightened her uniform. She picked up a fresh water pitcher. She walked back into the dining room. The negotiations had reached their critical point. Hartwell was reviewing the final term sheet, while his lawyers murmured approval. Webb looked triumphant, already calculating his exit. The mansion in Palo Alto, the yacht in Monaco, the foundation that would launder his reputation. Reeves maintained his expression of scientific detachment, the mask of credibility that made the whole fraud possible. Elena moved closer to the presentation screen, pretending to adjust a table setting. The current slide showed a graph of laboratory test results, dates, temperatures, efficiency readings. Her eye caught something that made her breath catch in her throat. The timestamps. 3 tests supposedly conducted on 3 different days in 3 different facilities, San Jose, Austin, and Phoenix. But the file metadata, visible in tiny print at the bottom of the slide, probably meant to be removed before the presentation, showed they had all been created within the same 30-minute window on March 14th. Not conducted, created. Someone had manufactured these results in a single afternoon, probably in a single office, probably by someone who didn't realize that every digital file carries a creation timestamp that's harder to fake than the data itself. It was the kind of mistake that amateurs made, people who understood PowerPoint but not forensics, who knew how to lie but not how to cover their tracks. Elena's mind raced through the implications. If the test data was fabricated, then the efficiency claims were fabricated. If the efficiency claims were fabricated, then the revenue projections were fiction. If the revenue projections were fiction, then Solaris Dynamics wasn't worth $700 million. It wasn't worth $700. It was worth precisely nothing. A shell game built on slides and confidence and the willingness of wealthy people to believe what they wanted to hear. She looked at Dr. Jonathan Reeves, PhD MIT, former NASA engineer. He was watching Webb with an expression she now recognized as rehearsed, the practiced calm of someone maintaining a performance, not reporting genuine results, the slight tension in his jaw, the way his eyes didn't quite match his smile, the micro movements of a liar who knew exactly how much was at stake. He knew. The chief technology officer of a company about to receive $700 million knew that his data was fabricated. He wasn't a victim of deception. He was its architect. Hartwell. I think we have a deal. Chen, have the lawyers draw up the final papers. We'll sign tomorrow morning. Elena's hands began to shake. 3 years of invisibility, 3 years of silence, 3 years of watching people like this move billions, while people like her mother lost everything. She thought about Maria Vasquez dying in that hospice room, whispering that she was proud of her daughter. That brilliance would find its way. That truth always won in the end, even when it seemed impossible. Elena set down the water pitcher. The sound was small, but in the moment before she spoke, it seemed to echo like a gavel coming down in a courtroom. Elena, Mr. Hartwell, I apologize for the interruption, but you're about to sign away $700 million based on fabricated data. The room went silent. Not the comfortable silence of agreement or contemplation, but the shocked silence of something so unexpected that minds couldn't process it. 12 executives, a platoon of lawyers, and 2 billionaires turned to stare at the waitress who had just spoken. Hartwell. Excuse me? His voice was ice. Elena had heard that voice directed at CEOs who disappointed him, at senators who dared challenge his lobbying, at anyone who crossed Richard Hartwell in his domain. Now it was directed at her, a server in a black uniform, nobody from nowhere, furniture that had suddenly learned to talk. Webb. This is absurd. Who is this person? Security? Elena. The test results on slide 17 were all created within a 30-minute window on March 14th. The file metadata is visible in the footer. I'm surprised your own analyst missed it. 3 different facilities, 3 different dates in the header, but the creation timestamps are consecutive. Someone manufactured those results in a single session. Webb's face flickered, just for an instant, a micro-expression of panic that crossed his features before his PR-trained composure reasserted itself. But Elena caught it. She had spent 3 years reading the faces of people who didn't see her, learning their tells, their fears, their deceptions. Webb. That's a clerical error. The files were consolidated for the presentation. The actual tests. Elena. The actual tests would have to violate the Shockley-Quasar limit. You're claiming 47.3% conversion efficiency for a single-junction silicon cell. The theoretical maximum for such a cell is approximately 33.7%. Even the best multi-junction cells ever created, using gallium arsenide stacks that cost $20,000 per square meter, barely reach 47% under concentrated sunlight conditions. She paused, letting the technical terminology settle over the room like a net. Elena Khan TD. You're not claiming breakthrough technology, Mr. Webb. You're claiming to have broken the laws of thermodynamics, and no amount of PowerPoint formatting can change physics. Chen leaned forward, his analytical mind engaging. The Shockley-Quasar limit? Elena? It's a fundamental constraint on single-junction solar cell efficiency, derived from the bandgap of the semiconductor material and the blackbody radiation spectrum of sunlight. William Shockley and Hans Joachim Quasar calculated it in 1961. It's been confirmed by 60 years of research at every major physics laboratory in the world. No commercially viable single-junction solar cell has ever exceeded it, and Solaris explicitly claims to use single-junction architecture in their cost projections. She turned to Reeves. The former NASA engineer had gone pale, his carefully constructed demeanor cracking under pressure it had never been designed to withstand. Elena Cohen TD. Dr. Reeves, you have a PhD in electrical engineering from MIT. You spent 15 years at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory designing power systems for Mars rovers. You published a paper on photovoltaic efficiency limits in 2009. You know exactly what the Shockley-Quasar limit means, which raises an interesting question. Did you falsify this data yourself, or did you simply agree to lend your credentials to someone else's fraud? Reeves, I don't have to. The methodology is proprietary. Elena, your revenue projections also fail Benford's law analysis. Natural data sets, sales figures, population counts, stock prices, Any numbers that arise from genuine measurement follow a specific logarithmic distribution in their leading digits. The digit 1 appears as a leading digit about 30% of the time, 2 about 17%, and so on down to 9 at roughly 4.5%. She picked up the tablet that Chen had been using, her fingers moving across the screen with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this analysis 1,000 times before. Elena, KNTC's. Your numbers show uniform distribution across leading digits with suspicious, clustering around 5 and 7. That's what happens when humans invent numbers instead of measuring them. We unconsciously avoid digits that feel too small or too large. May I? She didn't wait for permission. Her fingers flew across the screen, applying statistical functions that the Hartwell-Chen analysts apparently hadn't thought to use. Elena, KNTD, if I apply a simple chi-squared test to the first digit frequency distribution in your revenue tables, there. See the histogram? In genuine data, this would follow a steep logarithmic curve. In yours, it's nearly flat, with peaks at 5 and 7 that deviate from expected values by more than 4 standard deviations. The probability of this occurring naturally is less than 1 in 10 million. Hartwell's expression had shifted from outrage to something more dangerous. Genuine attention. He was no longer looking at Elena like malfunctioning furniture. He was looking at her like a weapon he hadn't known he possessed. Wabe, Mr. Hartwell, this woman is clearly disturbed. She's a waitress, for God's sake. Are you really going to let some... Hartwell, I'm going to let her finish. 5 words that changed everything. The room shifted, power dynamics realigning like iron filings around a new magnet. The analysts stopped typing. The lawyers stopped whispering. Even the air seemed to still. The silence belonged to Elena now. Elena, your year-over-year growth rates show variance patterns inconsistent with any known business cycle. 340%, then 280%, then 420%, then 315%, then 390%. Real companies don't grow like that. They follow mean reversion, seasonal patterns, market constraints, the fundamental limits of scaling. Your numbers were chosen to look impressive to investors who wouldn't calculate the standard deviation. She set down the tablet and faced Webb directly. Elena, KNTD, you're not selling a solar company, Mr. Webb. You're selling a fraud. And Dr. Reeves isn't your chief technology officer. He's your beard, a respected scientist whose credentials make the impossible seem credible. His job isn't to do science. His job is to make your lies sound like physics. Webb stood up, his face contorted with the particular rage of a con artist whose game has been exposed. Webb, this is slander. I'll sue you into oblivion. Do you have any idea who I am? What I've built? I have lawyers who... I'd have a story. Elena, you've built a story. A very expensive, very convincing story. But stories don't survive mathematical analysis, and fraud doesn't survive due diligence, when due diligence is actually done. She looked at the Hartwell-Chen analysts, who were now furiously typing on their tablets, running the tests she had described. Elena, KNTD, check the metadata, run the Benford analysis, calculate the Shockley-Queisser constraints. Everything I've said is verifiable in the next 10 minutes, and everything Mr. Webb has said is not. Constructed empire. Chen's analysts, now actually analyzing rather than rubber stamping, confirmed. Every anomaly Elena had identified. The metadata timestamps were damning. The efficiency claims were physically impossible. The revenue projections were statistically manufactured to a degree that suggested either profound incompetence or deliberate fraud, and no one in the room believed in incompetence anymore. Dr. Jonathan Reeves broke first. Under the withering gaze of 12 people who had suddenly remembered how to verify data, his scientific demeanor crumbled like wet paper. Reeves. I was promised stock options, $15 million worth when the company went public. He said it would work eventually, that we just needed the funding to make it real, that the technology was close enough that a little optimization in the interim projections wouldn't matter once we delivered. Hartwell. You were promised stock options to commit fraud. Reeves. I needed the money. My ex-wife, the alimony, the house in Newton. You don't understand what divorce costs in Massachusetts? Hartwell. I understand perfectly. You sold your integrity and your credentials for a payout that was never coming. You're not a scientist anymore, Dr. Reeves. You're a prop. A very expensive prop with a PhD. Webb was still trying to salvage the situation, his voice increasingly desperate, his Silicon Valley confidence collapsing into panic. Webb, This is a misunderstanding. The data is more nuanced than she's presenting. We can discuss adjustments to the projections, perhaps a lower valuation, a more conservative timeline. Hartwell, Mr. Chen, call security, and then call our attorneys. I want a fraud investigation opened before Mr. Webb leaves this building, and contact the SEC. This appears to be securities fraud on a scale that requires federal attention. Webb's face went white. You can't do this. I have investors. I have commitments. There are pension funds, endowments. Hartwell, you have victims. Every person who put money into Solaris based on your lies. Every employee who worked 80-hour weeks believing they were part of something real. Every pension fund and retail investor who would have been destroyed when your house of cards collapsed. They're not your investors, Mr. Webb. They're your marks. 2 security guards appeared at the door. Large men in dark suits who had probably never expected to escort a tech CEO from the building. Webb looked around the room, at the analysts who wouldn't meet his eyes, at Reeves who had already started cooperating in the hope of leniency, at Hartwell who regarded him with the cold contempt of a man who had been almost taken. His shoulders sagged. The performance was over. Webb, I want a lawyer. Hartwell, you're going to need several. I recommend starting with criminal defense. They let him out. Reeves followed moments later, head bowed, his MIT credentials suddenly worthless against the weight of mathematical truth. The room emptied of fraudsters and enablers, leaving behind only the people who had nearly been there, victims. The room emptied slowly. Lawyers departed to draft legal filings. Analysts left to document the near disaster and update their protocols. The catering staff began clearing plates, shooting confused glances at Elena, who remained standing by the sideboard like a statue that had temporarily come to life. Eventually, only Hartwell, Chen, and Elena remained, the billionaire, his partner, and the waitress who had just saved them $700 million. Hartwell studied Elena for a long moment. She had seen that look before, the calculating gaze of a man who assessed everything in terms of value and utility. But there was something else in it now, something that might have been respect. Hartwell, who are you? 3 words, the same 3 words asked of invisible people throughout history. The moment when someone finally sees the human being behind the uniform, the function, the role that society has assigned them. Elena Vasquez. I'm a server here. Hartwell. That's your job. That's not who you are. Who are you? Elena was quiet for a moment. 3 years of invisibility, 3 years of answering to the identity that debt and grief had imposed on her. 3 years of pretending that Elena Vasquez, the promising mathematician, had died alongside her mother in that hospice room. Elena, I have a double major from Columbia, applied mathematics and financial engineering. My thesis was on stochastic modeling for fraud detection in financial datasets. I was published in the Journal of Financial Economics, the Review of Financial Studies, and Quantitative Finance before I graduated. I had job offers from Goldman Sachs, McKinsey, Bridgewater, and Jane Street. Chen. What happened? Elena. My mother got sick. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. Insurance covered 80%, which means nothing when experimental treatments cost $100,000 a month. I spent 2 years fighting to keep her alive and 3 years paying for the privilege of watching her die. $417,000 in medical debt. The job offers expired. The contacts moved on. And waitressing pays cash, which is what you need when collection agencies are garnishing your bank accounts. Her voice was steady. She had learned to tell this story without crying, a survival skill born of necessity, of explaining to landlords and creditors and anyone else who demanded to know why someone with her credentials was living this life. Hartwell Maria Vasquez. Elena's composure cracked just slightly. How do you... Hartwell. I remember names. You mentioned her pension in 2008 during your analysis. Maria Vasquez, public school teacher, 40 years of service. Lost her retirement in the crash. Elena. She taught 3rd grade in the South Bronx for 4 decades. She believed in the system, in doing things right. She used to tell me that if I worked hard enough, if I was smart enough, if I played by the rules, the world would recognize it. Hartwell. And instead, the world took everything from her. Elena, and then it took her. Hartwell. But tonight you just saved me from becoming part of the problem she suffered from being another billionaire who enabled fraud because it was easier than doing the work to see through it. He stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the Manhattan skyline. A city built on money, much of it honest, much of it not. A city where people like Maria Vasquez taught children and lost their pensions, while people like Marcus Webb spun lies into millions. Hartwell, Con TD. I've built a $12 billion company. I have analysts from Harvard and Wharton and Stanford. I have due diligence teams that cost more per hour than most people earn in a week. And a waitress saw what they missed. Beijing. To be fair, Richard, she's not really a waitress. Hartwell. No, she never was. Hartwell turned from the window. Hartwell, I need someone who sees what others miss, someone who understands both the mathematics and the human impulses that corrupt them, someone who will tell me the truth even when it's inconvenient, even when I don't want to hear it, even when there's money on the table and pressure to close. Elena, what exactly are you offering? Hartwell, a new division at Hartwell Chen, quantitative risk assessment and fraud detection. You would build it from scratch, hire your own team, establish your own protocols, report directly to Chen and me. Every acquisition, every major investment, every significant deal would pass through your analysis before we commit. Elena felt the floor shift beneath her feet. This wasn't possible. Things like this didn't happen to people like her. People drowning in debt, people wearing black uniforms and serving wine, people who had watched their futures dissolve in hospital waiting rooms. Elena, I have $417,000 in debt. Hartwell, you just saved me $700 million. Your debt is a rounding error. It'll be cleared as a signing bonus. Consider it a finder's fee for the fraud you just exposed. She stared at him, waiting for the catch, the condition, the moment when the offer would reveal itself as another kind of trap. The world had taught her to distrust good fortune. Hartwell, Kanyid, salary of $350,000 to start, with performance bonuses tied to losses prevented. Stock options vesting over 4 years. Full benefits, including comprehensive medical coverage for any family members. Elena, I don't have family anymore. Hartwell, then you'll be building one. The best teams become families over time. I'd know. Chen here has been my brother for 30 years, through market crashes and personal crises and everything in between. Chen nodded, a small smile on his usually impassive face. He's difficult to work with, but rewarding. Elena thought about her mother, dying in that hospice room, whispering that she was proud of her daughter, that brilliance would find its way, that truth always won in. The end, even when the world seemed designed to bury it. Maria Vasquez had been wrong about a lot of things. She'd been wrong about the system, about playing by the rules, about working hard and expecting the world to notice. But maybe tonight, she had been right about this one thing. Elena, I have conditions. Hartwell, I expected you would. People who don't have conditions aren't worth hiring. Elena, full autonomy in my assessments. No pressure to approve deals because someone wants them to close. My team answers to the truth, not to convenience, not to politics, not to what anyone wants to hear. Hartwell agreed. What else? Elena, I want to establish a scholarship fund for students from working-class families pursuing quantitative degrees, mathematics, statistics, financial engineering. The people who have the talent but not the money, the connections, or the safety net that lets them take risks. Chen. What would you call it? Elena smiled, the first real smile she'd allowed herself in 3 years. Elena. The Maria Vasquez. Memorial Fund for Quantitative Excellence, for all the invisible people who just need someone to see them. Hartwell. We'll endow it with $5 million to start. Chen will handle the details. He extended his hand. Elena looked at it. The hand of a billionaire, the hand of a man who had never tipped a server in his life, the hand of someone who was about to change everything she thought she knew about her future. Hartwell, Cantid. Welcome to Hartwell Chen, Ms. Vasquez. Elena shook it. Her grip was firm, her gaze steady. She was no longer invisible. Elena, one more thing. Hartwell. Yes, Elena? You never tipped me. In 18 months, 7 occasions of service, not a single dollar. The staff here remember that about you. Hartwell stared at her for a moment, then laughed, a genuine laugh that seemed to surprise even him. Hartwell. You're right, I never do. It's a policy. I always considered tipping to be, beneath the transaction, an unnecessary social ritual. Elena. The service staff here remember that policy. They also remember when someone is kind, when someone sees them as people rather than functions. You might want to consider what your policy costs you, in loyalty, in information, in the thousand small ways that invisible people decide what you deserve to know. Hartwell was silent for a long moment. In the window behind him, the lights of Manhattan sparkled like a galaxy laid flat. Hartwell, you're already teaching me things, Ms. Vasquez. Elena, that's what you're paying me for.